"Don't sit near me," my son whispered, not even looking at me. He was straightening his tie, standing just a few feet from the altar. I stared at him, stunned, while the pianist played softly behind us and guests smiled cluelessly. He was the same boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy I raised after his mother died. Now he couldn't stand the sight of me on his wedding day. I didn't walk out. I sat in the back. Because what happened next wasn't the beginning, it was the end. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. He used to call me his hero. Now I was just the old man. When Daniel was little, he'd grab my hand every time we crossed the street, even when he was 10, and thought he was too big for such things. He was a quiet boy, thoughtful, never the loudest in the room, but always the one watching, understanding. After his mother, Marjorie, passed away when he was 8, it was just the two of us, father and son, figuring out how to survive grief together. I used to work the early shift at the mill. I'd come home exhausted, my back screaming, but I'd still cook dinner, help him with homework, and sit with him on the couch until he fell asleep. He used to say, "You're the strongest man I know, Dad." It meant the world, because I wasn't sure I was strong enough back then. The first year without Marjorie was the hardest. I remember one night Daniel had a nightmare and came into my room sobbing. I pulled him close, and we sat there in the dark, both of us crying. No words, just the sound of grief echoing in our small living room. But we made it through. Together, he loved Legos, baseball, and blueberry pancakes. I took him to every Saturday morning game, even if I hadn't slept. I built him a treehouse that leaned a little too far to the left, but he loved it anyway. He'd climb up there and read, or just sit. Said it was his thinking place. He was a good kid, a really good kid. In high school, he drifted a little, like most teenagers do. Got into music I didn't understand, started spending more time in his room. But he still said, "Love you" every night before bed, even if it was mumbled and halfway up the stairs. When college came around, I cashed out a savings bond Marjorie and I had kept since he was born. Used that, plus some overtime hours, to cover his first year of tuition. He went off to study business, said he wanted to take care of me one day. I told him I didn't need taking care of, just visits, just honesty. He came home that first Thanksgiving with stories, laughter, and a tattoo he hadn't told me about, a small one on his forearm. Just a quote. "Family is earned." I remember reading that and smiling. I thought it meant something good. I thought it meant we had built something strong. But over the years, things changed in small, quiet ways. The phone calls got shorter, then less frequent. Holidays turned into quick drop-ins. Sometimes he'd bring laundry. Sometimes he'd bring silence. I chalked it up to life jobs, pressure, distractions. That's what everyone told me. Kids grow up, they get busy, and maybe they do. But some things you feel deep in your gut, even if no one says them aloud. One summer, I offered to take him on a weekend fishing trip, something we hadn't done in years. He said he was too busy with stuff. I asked what kind of stuff. He didn't answer. Just said, "You wouldn't get it, Dad." I remember sitting on the back porch that night, looking at the stars like Marjorie and I used to do. I whispered, "Did I lose him somewhere? Or is this just life?" Then came the Christmas he didn't show up. No call, no excuse. Just a text the next morning that said, "Hope you had a good one." I made a full dinner for 2 anyway. Set out his favorite napkin, the one with the baseball stitching on the corner. Left his plate in the microwave, untouched. Even then, I didn't let bitterness take root. I told myself, he'll come around. He just needs time. Maybe I was holding on to memories too tightly. Maybe I didn't want to see the shift that was already happening. But it was real. The gap between us wasn't just distance, it was something deeper. A space I didn't know how to fill anymore. Still, I never imagined he'd push me so far out of his life that I'd be nothing more than a line on a legal document, a signature to forge, a house to claim. Back then, I thought the hardest thing I'd ever survive was losing Marjorie. I was wrong. The worst pain is watching your only child walk away, not because he has to, but because he wants to. And one day, he came back with a woman by his side and a voice I barely recognized. They didn't throw me out. They made me invisible. The first time I met Rachel, I remember thinking, she's polished. Not warm, not kind, just polished. She had one of those smiles that flickered too quickly, the kind that vanishes the second someone looks away. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and said, "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mr. Hastings." Mr. Hastings. Not Dad. Not even Charles. Formal. Distant. Practiced. Daniel hovered behind her like a shadow, barely speaking, just smiling politely, like a guest in his own memory. She looked around the house, the home Marjorie and I built, like she was appraising it. "So much character," she said, her eyes scanning the fireplace mantel where Marjorie's photo still stood. I offered her coffee. She declined. Said she was on a cleanse. We sat in the living room, well, they sat. I made space, like I always do. I asked about her job. She said she worked in property staging. Something in her tone made it sound more important than it probably was. She talked about modern interiors, resale value, marketable neutral palettes. I nodded, politely. Then she leaned forward, touched Daniel's knee, and said, "I told you we could do so much with this place." I blinked. "This place?" Daniel laughed a little, not looking at me. "She means, like, if we ever wanted to, just saying, hypothetically do some updates. You know, down the line." I stayed quiet. They left not long after, but the silence they left behind hung in the room for hours. Over the next few weeks, they visited more, always unannounced. Rachel started bringing folders, floor plan sketches, renovation ideas, Pinterest printouts. I asked if they were planning to move in. Daniel said, "Not yet, but it's good to plan." One Saturday, she arrived wearing something that stopped my breath. Marjorie's ring. I recognized it instantly, the slim band of gold, the tiny ruby we saved 3 months to buy. Rachel twirled it on her finger like it was costume jewelry. "I hope you don't mind," she said casually. Daniel said it was okay. I just wanted to see how it fit. I looked at Daniel. He looked at the floor. "I would have appreciated being asked," I said gently. Rachel smiled like I'd just told a quaint old joke. "Of course. Next time." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room in the dark, holding Marjorie's photo in my lap. Her smile, frozen in time, looked back at me, with that mix of softness and strength she always had. "I don't know what's happening, hun," I whispered, "but it doesn't feel right." It wasn't just the ring. It was the slow erasure of my presence and my place in my own home. 1 week later, Rachel hosted a birthday dinner for herself at their apartment. She invited me, said it was important to the family dynamic. I went, of course, wore a clean shirt, polished my shoes, took a bottle of wine, good one too, Marjorie would have insisted. When I arrived, Rachel greeted me at the door with a glass of sparkling water. "Non-alcoholic," she said. "Didn't want to risk any old age mix-ups." Daniel chuckled. I said nothing. They had rearranged the apartment, sterile whites, grays, everything spotless and cold. A big group was already there. Rachel's parents, a couple co-workers, a few people I didn't know. I was seated near the hallway, next to a coat rack. They laughed, toasted, shared stories. None of them involved me. Rachel told the table, "Daniel's childhood was a bit humble, but I'm helping him evolve." Someone asked about the ring. She held it up proudly. "A family heirloom, sort of. We'll modernize the setting, of course." I stared at Daniel. He didn't say a word. My stomach turned. I felt something break, not with a bang, but like a crack in glass you didn't notice until the light hit it just right. I left early. No one noticed. On the drive home, I couldn't feel my hands. I kept them tight on the wheel, but they felt numb. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was nothing. The next morning, I found a sealed envelope tucked inside my screen door. Inside was a letter from a real estate firm. It said, "As discussed, here are the preliminary documents regarding the proposed transfer of ownership and occupancy of the Hastings property." There was a signature line with my name, already signed, but I hadn't touched a pen. I stood there on the porch, staring at my forged name, and for the first time, I understood. This wasn't neglect. It was a plan. You don't need a knife to stab someone, just a pen. The paper trembled in my hands. Not because they'd surprised me, but because deep down I knew. I had known for weeks. This was just proof. I stared at my signature printed cleanly at the bottom of the page. Slanted in a way mine never was. Slightly looped at the H in Hastings, something I never did. They'd tried to copy it, but they didn't know I always crossed my T with a sharp flick to the right. Marjorie used to tease me about it. "This isn't mine," I said aloud to no one. "I didn't sign this." It was a transfer of property ownership, tied to a power of attorney application that was quietly being processed on my behalf. According to this, I had willingly and permanently assigned my home and all associated rights to Daniel Hastings and Rachel Sinclair to be finalized prior to long-term transition. I didn't understand the language at first. Transition? What transition? Then I found the attached folder. Inside were pamphlets, brochures, a facility booklet with my name handwritten in the upper corner, a local senior living community, private rooms, meal plans, activities. I was being moved out, discreetly, efficiently, legally. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were clearing the stage ahead of schedule. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Same one Marjorie and I bought secondhand in 1982. Still had the faint coffee stain from when Daniel knocked over his hot chocolate in second grade. I traced that stain with my finger, trying not to cry. Then I picked up the phone. Louis answered on the second ring. "Charles?" His voice always sounded like an old record. A little crackly, a little tired, but solid. "Louis," I said, "I need you to come over." He showed up that evening in a beige windbreaker and worn loafers, still carried his leather notary case like it was a briefcase. I showed him the papers. He read in silence, glasses sliding low on his nose. "Signature's off," he said quietly. "Your S curls under. This one floats." He flipped the page, pointed to a date, "Filed without your physical presence. That's illegal." Then he opened the folder with the brochures. "This is premeditated." His eyes met mine. "They forged your name, Charles." I nodded. My chest was hollow, but my spine was stiff. I wasn't going to collapse. Louis sighed. "You want to press charges?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I want to see how far they're willing to go." He leaned back, nodded slowly. "All right, then let's make sure they don't win." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. I handed him every letter, every document, every email I could print, including the one I'd found on Rachel's laptop 2 weeks earlier. She'd left it open during a visit. I'd glanced at the screen when she was in the bathroom. Subject: Facility Intake. Charles Hastings. Message: Please prepare room 204 for resident transfer post-wedding. Family authorization form to follow. Louis read it twice, jaw tightening. "She already made the call," he said. "She expected zero resistance." I nodded. "She's right about one thing. I've been quiet. Too quiet." That night, I went to the attic, dusted off an old box labeled Marjorie House Deed. Inside was every document tied to this home. Mortgage records, title history, the original deed, handwritten and notarized in 1985. I sat there on the wooden floor, flashlight in one hand, willpower in the other. This house wasn't just wood and walls. It was memories, love, loss, forgiveness. It was Marjorie's laughter in the kitchen, Daniel's muddy shoes on the carpet, Sunday mornings with pancakes and gospel music on low volume. They weren't going to steal that from me. The next morning, I woke up early, swept the porch, brewed coffee, Wrote a to-do list, not for chores, but for protection. 1. Update will. 2. Secure house in living trust. 3. Record all conversations. 4. Don't tell them anything. 5. Play along, because I realized something powerful in that moment. They thought I was already halfway gone. They mistook grief for weakness, silence for surrender. But I was raised different, built different. I called Louis again and said, "Let's start with the will." "Today?" "Yes." He paused. "Charles, are you sure you're ready for this?" I stared out the window, saw the tree Daniel once fell out of when he was 7. I'd carried him back inside, crying and bruised, whispering, "You're okay. I've got you." And now he was doing the bruising. "I'm ready," I said. By the time the sun set, my son was out of the will, and he didn't even know it yet. They thought I was weak. I let them believe it. The thing about being quiet all your life is people think they can speak freely around you. They think silence means ignorance, that you're too old, too tired, too out of touch to notice the things whispered behind half-closed doors. That was their mistake. A week after Louis and I rewrote the will, I invited Daniel and Rachel over for coffee, just like old times. "Wanted to catch up?" I told them. "Maybe talk through some things." Rachel showed up first. Tight smile. Designer coat. She walked in like she was doing me a favor. Daniel came in 5 minutes later, distracted, on his phone, barely made eye contact. I'd set the table like Marjorie used to blue ceramic mugs, a plate of butter cookies, and cloth napkins folded just right. They barely noticed. I placed a small audio recorder under the napkin closest to me. Nothing high-tech, just a basic one-button recorder I'd bought at the hardware store a few years ago to remember old song lyrics and recipe tips. This time, it was to remember something else. We sat down. I smiled like a man who didn't know better. Rachel dove right in. "So, Charles," she began, swirling her coffee without drinking it, "we've been talking a lot about your next steps." "My next steps?" I said gently, playing dumb. She smiled. "You've had a wonderful life here. It's just, well, with the wedding coming up, we're juggling a lot. And we figured, it's time we make things easier for you." Daniel looked up then, gave me a half nod. "We just want you to be comfortable, Dad. Safe." "Is that why you booked me a room?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "At Fairwood Estates?" Rachel blinked, then smiled wider. "Oh well, we didn't mean to jump ahead. It's just a precaution." "Convenient timing," I said. "Right after the house changes hands?" She paused, looked at Daniel. He stayed quiet. So she kept talking. "Charles," she said, putting on that voice, the one people use when they speak to small children or the elderly. "We know this place means a lot to you, but it's not really functional for someone your age. The stairs, the cold floors, the upkeep." She leaned in. "Letting go now will give you peace later." I nodded slowly, as if it all made sense. Inside, I was counting. 1, 2, 3. Then she said it. "He'll barely remember the difference in a year anyway," she told Daniel, not even looking at me. "This whole transition will be smoother if we just move things along." Daniel didn't object, didn't flinch. He said, "We'll handle it. Once it's official, it'll just be a formality." They were talking about my life like it was already packed up in boxes. I sat there, heart pounding, willing my face not to change. I smiled, even laughed a little. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I do need help remembering." Rachel chuckled. "Exactly. It's not about taking anything. It's about helping." I reached over and passed her another cookie. "You're very helpful, Rachel." Later that night, I played the recording back, alone, in the dark. Their voices echoed through the room, calm, calculating, comfortable. I stared at the recorder, listening to my own voice nod along, play the part. Louis came by the next morning. I handed him the audio. He listened without saying a word. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. "That's enough to bury them legally, but not emotionally," I said. He looked up. What do you mean? I mean, I don't want to sue them. I don't want to fight this in court. I want them to reveal themselves, publicly, loudly. Louis raised an eyebrow. You're planning something. I'm watching, listening. I'll know when the moment comes. He nodded. You're more dangerous than you look, old man. I smiled. I've been underestimated before. 2 days later, I received a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Still interested? It was Rachel's ex, the one who'd warned me earlier. I replied, talk. He sent an audio clip. Rachel's voice again. Different tone, drunk, slurred slightly but clear. He thinks I love him, she was saying. He's such a pushover. Once I get the house, I'll let Daniel do whatever he wants. I just want that damn porch gone. It's so ugly. Then a laugh. Cold and bitter. You know what the worst part is? She added. His dad still thinks they're close. Isn't that pathetic? I didn't know what hurt more, the way she spoke, or the fact that Daniel never stopped her. I saved the clip, backed it up 3 times, labeled it Final Proof, and then I RSVP'd to their wedding, not as a guest, as the man they forgot was still watching. They played games with papers. I answered with documents of my own. I walked into Louis's office with a manila envelope under my arm and a quiet fire in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. You sure about this? Louis asked as I sat down across from him. His office smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. He always kept the blinds half closed, like too much light might wash out the truth. I'm not writing them out of anger, I said. I'm writing them out of protection. He nodded and pulled up the documents. We'll do this in 2 steps. First, updated will, then the trust. The new will was simple, effective, final. Daniel was removed entirely. No fallback clauses, no room for argument. Emily, my niece's daughter, who checked on me every week without ever asking for anything, was now the primary beneficiary. We added a no contest clause. If Daniel or Rachel tried to fight it, they'd automatically forfeit their share. Not that they had one anymore. I want this house locked down, I said. Louis nodded. That's where the irrevocable trust comes in. We set it up that same afternoon. Marjorie's house, that's what I named the property in the trust. Sounded right. She was the reason I built everything to begin with. Ownership passed to the trust, not to me as an individual, meaning it couldn't be taken, forged, or reassigned. Not without massive legal firepower. And thanks to Louis's airtight language, any attempt would trigger full transfer to charity. If they push, I said, they lose everything. Louis leaned back, tapping his pen. You know this could end the relationship permanently. I looked at the framed photo on his desk, him and his daughter at her graduation. Then I looked down at my own wrinkled hands. What relationship? I said quietly. He didn't argue. When I left his office, I felt heavier, but also lighter. Strange, that. Like setting down a load you didn't even know you were carrying. That night, I went home and opened Marjorie's old jewelry box. Inside was a little envelope, yellowed, soft around the edges. It was her handwriting, to be opened if Daniel ever forgets who he is. I smiled. She always knew. Inside was a photo of the 3 of us, Daniel on my shoulders, Marjorie holding his hands from behind, all of us mid-laugh. On the back she'd written, "Remember, love, not what they say, what they do." I placed the photo inside my jacket pocket. It would stay with me until this was done. A few days later, I was outside trimming the hedges when Greg, my neighbor, walked over. "Big day coming up, huh?" he said. "The wedding?" "Yeah, you going?" I nodded. "I'll be there." He paused. "You sure that's wise?" "Probably not," I said. "But I won't let them finish this story their way." Greg, a veteran who'd once lost his brother to a nursing scam, nodded slowly. "Just don't go alone." That gave me an idea. Back inside, I called Emily. She answered on the second ring. "You remember that old camcorder in the garage?" I asked. "Sure. Why?" I need you to dust it off. I've got a little project. She didn't ask questions, just said, I'll be there in 20. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table. I explained everything: the fake signatures, the property transfer, the recordings, the facility plans. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She clenched her jaw and said, I'll help you, whatever you need. I told her about the wedding, about the moment I planned to speak, about the USB drive I'd prepared with every recording, every voice memo, every email backup. We rehearsed how I'd walk in, what I'd say, when I'd plug it in. You're sure you want to do this? She asked. They tried to erase me, I said. Now they'll have to hear me. That night, I wrote a single line on a note card and tucked it into my pocket. Loud silence is still betrayal. The next morning, Rachel's ex sent one final message. I'm done being quiet. If you need a statement, I'll give one. She did this to me too. Different version, same goal. I thanked him. We'd never meet, but I owed him a great deal. One day before the wedding, Daniel called. First time in months. Hey, Dad, he said, voice uncertain. Just wanted to make sure you got the invite. I got it. A pause. I know things have been weird, he said, but Rachel's excited. She really wants to build something stable. I almost laughed. She already has, with a foundation of lies. Another pause. He didn't argue, didn't apologize either. We'll have a seat for you near the back, he finally said. Don't worry, I replied. I won't be sitting. And then I picked out my best suit, the one I wore to Marjorie's funeral. Because this wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. He told me not to sit near him, so I stood where everyone could hear me. I wore the navy blue suit, the one Marjorie always said, brought out the color in my eyes. It still fit, though the shoulders sagged a bit more now. I pinned her brooch on the inside lining, close to my heart. If I was going to war, I wasn't going in alone. The church was small but elegant. White lilies on every pew, gold-rimmed programs laid out neatly. People smiled politely as I walked in, most of them strangers, some vaguely familiar. Rachel's crowd, mostly. Daniel didn't greet me. He stood near the altar, eyes scanning the room, never once landing on mine. I found my name printed on a place card in the back row, next to a drafty vent, behind a pillar, out of sight. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Then I folded the card, slipped it in my coat pocket, and walked to the second row, the one where family sits, the space where fathers belong. No one stopped me. The music started. Bridesmaids entered. Then Rachel appeared, radiant and poised, a dress that sparkled, a bouquet that looked like a magazine cover. She smiled like nothing had ever gone wrong. They reached the altar. The priest welcomed everyone and began the vows. Before we proceed, he said, Daniel has requested to share a few words. I stiffened. Daniel turned to the guests, cleared his throat. I just want to thank everyone for being here, he began. Especially those who've supported us, who've believed in our journey. He glanced at me just once. And those who let go gracefully when it was time. My jaw clenched. Then Rachel stepped forward, ready to recite her vows. But before the priest could prompt her, I stood up. The room fell silent. Excuse me, I said, calm but firm. I have something to share before this union continues. Daniel's face turned white. Rachel froze. Murmurs spread like wildfire. I walked down the aisle, slowly, deliberately, reached into my coat, and pulled out a small USB drive. I've brought a gift, I said, for everyone here. Just a few memories. Not old photos, more recent ones. Conversations. Plans. The priest looked uncertain. Sir, perhaps? Rachel snapped. You can't do this. I turned to her. You already did. I'm just showing your work. Emily, sitting near the front, handed the USB to the audiovisual guy. He plugged it in. The church projector screen lit up. Rachel's voice filled the room. He thinks I love him. He's such a pushover. Once I get the house, I'll let Daniel do whatever he wants. Gasps echoed across the pews. Guests turned. Some covered their mouths. One woman stood up and walked out. The next clip played. Rachel again. He'll barely remember the difference in a year anyway. The transition will be smoother if we just move things along. Daniel didn't speak. He looked at his shoes. The priest stepped back. Rachel spun toward Daniel. "You said you deleted that!" "I thought I did," he whispered. Another voice came over the speaker. "Rachel's ex. She's done this before. Took my dad's property. Left once the deed was done. She's a con, just dresses it better." The room was silent, dense, heavy with realization. Then Rachel turned, voice rising. "You manipulative old man. You set this up." I looked her dead in the eyes. "No, Rachel. You set this up. I just pressed play." She dropped her bouquet, turned to Daniel. "Say something." But he just stood there. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. And that told everyone all they needed to know. Rachel stormed down the aisle, shoes clicking hard against the polished floor. The doors slammed behind her. I turned to the priest. "Now you can continue," I said, and walked out without another word. I didn't need applause. I didn't want it. I just needed the silence to speak for itself. Outside, the sky was soft with gray light. Emily caught up to me. "You okay?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I will be." She smiled. Marjorie would have been proud. I didn't reply. I just looked up at the church cross, glinting faintly against the clouds, and nodded. Daniel didn't follow. Not that day. But someone else did, Rachel's father. He handed me a small folder and said, "You should see this." She did the same to my brother. I didn't realize until today. I opened the folder. Legal papers, names, transactions. She had a pattern. And now, the whole town was going to know. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. For the first time in weeks, my house was silent. Not the tense silence that buzzes under your skin, just peace. No calls. No Rachel. No papers stuffed in my mailbox. I sat on the porch the morning after the wedding, coffee in hand, and stared at the empty street like it might explain something. What had I expected? Applause? Redemption? Regret? All I felt was stillness. And strangely, a kind of sadness I hadn't anticipated. Because when you prepare for battle that long, you forget what to do when the fight is over. Emily stopped by around noon, holding a newspaper and 2 bagels. "Don't get mad," she said, placing the paper in front of me. They printed it. The headline read, "Local groom abandoned at altar. After bride scheme exposed." Subhead, "Father's audio evidence uncovers property plot during wedding ceremony." My name wasn't in the article, thank God. But Daniel's was. Rachel's too. The journalist had been discreet, but facts are facts and gossip travels faster than truth. Greg showed up later with his dog and said, "Half the town's saying you were planted by the FBI." I laughed for the first time in days. Guess I still know how to make an impression. But when the laughter faded, I realized something was still missing. Daniel. He hadn't called. Hadn't come by. I wasn't sure what I wanted. An apology? An explanation? A yell? Maybe I just wanted to know he felt something. That night, I went to the garage and pulled out an old box labeled Keepsakes. Inside were drawings he'd made as a kid, a wooden airplane we'd built together, his baseball glove still stiff and cracked with time. I sat there for hours, holding pieces of a past that now felt like fiction. The next morning, I found a manila envelope at my door. Inside was a letter, not handwritten, typed, from a law office, not Rachel's usual one. Our client, Daniel Hastings, has filed a statement of disassociation from Miss Rachel Sinclair. Attached is a notarized affidavit, revoking all shared property intentions, financial links, and joint ownership claims. I blinked. Read it again. Daniel had cut ties. Legally. Cleanly. There was no message from him, no "Dad, I'm sorry" note. Just paperwork. But for someone who couldn't even look me in the eye at the altar, this was something. maybe all he had left to give. Emily came over later that afternoon and found me on the porch again. "You good?" she asked. "I don't know." She sat beside me. "You were right about all of it. And still, it hurts." I nodded. She handed me another envelope. This one was smaller, handwritten. Just said, "Thought you'd want this. Rachel's ex." Inside were printouts of Rachel's past schemes. 2 other older men, both with property. Similar strategy. Charm. Isolate. Manipulate. Then vanish. One had lost everything. The other had pressed charges and lost, due to lack of evidence. She'd been perfecting her game. Until now. I filed the papers. Sent copies to Louis. Didn't plan on using them, but it helped to know that the house she tried to steal would now be used for good. That night, I turned on the porch light. Saturday there. In the dark. Let the quiet wrap around me like an old blanket. Daniel still hadn't shown up. But I stopped waiting. Because something else had started to grow inside me, not vengeance, not justice. Just space. Space for healing. Then Emily said something that froze me. "I think Rachel's not done. Someone saw her meeting a real estate agent yesterday." My fingers tightened around my mug. She might have lost the wedding, but she still wanted the house. You can board up a house, but some people always find a way back in. 3 days after the wedding, the doorbell rang at exactly 7:13 a.m. I knew it wasn't Emily she always texted before coming, and I knew it wasn't Greg he just walked in without knocking. So I opened the door, slow and cautious. And there he was, Daniel. His eyes looked like mine, used to after long nights at the mill, swollen, red-rimmed, half asleep, but too wired to rest. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the same wrinkled shirt he'd worn to the rehearsal dinner. "Can I come in?" he finally asked. I stepped aside. He walked in like a stranger visiting a museum, touching nothing, glancing around at walls he once drew dinosaurs on. His steps were hesitant, like the floor might remember. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I taught him fractions, where Marjorie used to sneak him extra slices of pie when I wasn't looking. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I didn't know she forged your name," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't read the documents?" "I skimmed. She said it was just a draft, that she'd talked to you before anything was filed." "She didn't." He nodded slowly. "I believe you." Silence hung between us. Not just the silence of the morning, but years of quiet that had never been addressed. "I was stupid," he said, voice cracking. "I let her do the talking, the planning. I just followed." I sipped my coffee. "Why?" He looked up at me, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time, shame. "Because it was easier than facing what I'd become." I stayed quiet. "I let her convince me you were in the way, that your memories were just clutter, that your life, this house, was a burden." He swallowed hard. "I think I needed someone to blame for how stuck I felt. And you were just there, reminding me of everything I hadn't done." I didn't interrupt. I let the guilt pour out. "I didn't just lose a fiancé," he whispered. "I lost every person in that room. I'm getting calls from coworkers, friends, even Rachel's parents are distancing themselves. And I deserve it, every bit of it." I studied him for a moment. He looked more like the boy I raised than he had in years. Not polished, not perfect, just real. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small black notebook. "I've been writing," he said. "Things I should have said years ago." He slid it across the table. I didn't touch it. "Is this an apology?" I asked. "It's a start." I finally looked at him. "You stood next to her," I said softly, "while she wore your mother's ring, while she called my life a project, and you said nothing." "I know," he whispered. "She stole more than a house. She stole our family. And you let her." He nodded, tears now slipping down his cheeks. "I thought if I said something, I'd lose her. But not saying anything, I lost you." Silence again. Then he asked, "Is it too late?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up, walked over to the drawer near the fridge, pulled out Marjorie's photo, set it on the table between us. She would have forgiven you, I said. He stared at the photo. But I'm not her. I sat back down. I don't hate you, I said. But trust, that's earned back. Slowly, painfully, he nodded again. I'll wait. I finally picked up the notebook, flipped to the first page. I was wrong. I forgot who raised me. I forgot who taught me how to hold a bat, tie a tie, read a map. But I remember now. I closed it gently, didn't say a word. He stood to leave, hesitated, then asked, "You gonna be okay?" I looked around the house. "My walls are still standing," I said. "That's more than I can say for yours." He nodded and walked out the door. Emily came over that evening, found me sitting on the porch again. "He came?" she asked. I nodded. "Apologize?" "As best he could." She sat beside me. "Do you believe him?" "I believe he's broken," I said. "And maybe that's the first honest thing he's been in a while." We watched the sunset in silence. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text. From an unknown number. "I know what you did. This isn't over." No name. But I didn't need one. Rachel had vanished. But she hadn't disappeared. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. And the next day, someone left a business card wedged in my front door. Rachel Sinclair, real estate consultant. Back of the card. "Let's talk about legacy. She tried to sell my house, so I made sure the world knew whose name was on it." The real estate card sat on my kitchen table like a threat dressed in lipstick. Rachel's name. Rachel's logo. Rachel's handwriting on the back. Let's talk about legacy. I didn't call her. I didn't throw it away either. I left it there in full view, like a trophy of a battle she still thought she could win. By that afternoon, Louis had already filed for a cease and desist. "This crosses the line," he told me. "She's not just poking around. She's trying to bait you." "And I'm not biting," I said. But part of me was curious, what exactly was she planning? Emily came by later with groceries and a stack of local bulletins. She tossed one on the table. "Found this on the community board," she said. There it was, a printed flyer. Historic property opportunity, soon to hit the market. Contact Rachel Sinclair, independent consultant. No address, no photos. But the description? It was my house. Down to the blue shutters and the wraparound porch Marjorie loved so much. "She's testing the waters," Emily said, trying to stir interest. I ran a hand over my face. "She doesn't even care if it's legal. She just wants the buzz. She's betting on people being curious enough to pressure you. Or scare me." Exactly. I took a long breath, looked around my home. Marjorie's plants still grew wild in the corner by the kitchen. Daniel's childhood drawings were still framed above the hallway light switch. The floors creaked in all the right places. She wanted to sell all of that. Erase it. Wipe the house clean for someone else to paint over. And that's when I made a decision. Not just to protect the house, but to use it. The next morning, I called the local Veterans Center, asked for Greg's contact, the coordinator he'd always mentioned. Her name was Alana. "Charles Hastings," she said. "Greg speaks very highly of you." "I've got a house," I told her, "and a plan." I explained what I'd been through, what the house meant, what it still could mean. "I don't want to rent it. I don't want to sell it. I want it to matter. To someone who actually needs it." There was silence on the other end. Then, "You ever thought about transitional housing? For vets? For anyone displaced? Returning veterans? Single parents? Folks aging out of foster care? People who need a bridge between nowhere and somewhere?" That night, I walked through every room of the house with a notebook, took inventory. What could be cleared? What could be kept? What stories were still hiding in the drawers? Emily helped me sort everything. We found Marjorie's old recipe cards, Daniel's baseball trophies, boxes of photos, and one long-forgotten cassette tape labeled Porch Memories. It was Marjorie, softly narrating a story to Daniel when he was 6. We played it and cried, then played it again. By the end of the week, I'd filed the paperwork. Marjorie's house officially registered as a transitional housing trust, protected by state charity laws and veteran support clauses. Rachel couldn't touch it now, not even with a court order. Louis smiled when I showed him the documents. You didn't just defend your legacy, he said. You weaponized it. I smiled too. For the first time, the house felt alive again, not as a possession, but as a purpose. A few days later, Greg brought by 2 local volunteers, one a carpenter, the other a social worker. They walked through the house like it was sacred. This place could help a lot of people, one of them said. That's the idea. The news spread fast. By the end of the week, a local reporter reached out. She asked if I'd give a quote. I said sure. I kept it simple. This house was built on love, and now it will stay that way. They printed that line on the front page of the Sunday Local. Rachel must have seen it, because that night, I got another card. No note this time, just the card, torn down the middle, and on the back, in sharp red ink, someone had written, "You don't get to win. Not yet. Blood may betray you, but sometimes strangers carry your name better than family." It started small, just 2 people. A woman named Kara and her son Theo. She'd just escaped an abusive marriage and needed a temporary place until her job at the local diner became steady. Greg vouched for her. Just a few weeks, he said. They don't need much, just safety. I gave them the guest room and the office space. She cried when I handed her the keys. This isn't charity, I told her. It's repayment. For all the times I wish someone had done this for me. Theo was 6. He reminded me of Daniel, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, always asking questions. He asked me if the house was magic. I said, it's getting there. Over the next month, others came. Quietly, carefully. A Navy vet named Luis, who slept in his truck after losing his job. A college student, Alicia, who'd aged out of the foster system with nowhere to go. An elderly woman, June, who'd been evicted after her landlord died, and the new owner doubled the rent. They didn't just live here. They helped. Luis fixed the back fence. Alicia reorganized the pantry. June repainted the porch rails and planted flowers out front, marigolds. Marjorie's favorite. One evening, I came home from the grocery store and found them all sitting in the living room playing cards. Someone had cooked chili. Laughter filled the air. It didn't sound like charity. It sounded like home. Emily watched it all with pride. She came by daily now, helping with everything from intake forms to cooking. Do you realize what you've done? She asked one night. You turned grief into shelter. I smiled. Marjorie would have done the same. Daniel hadn't come by. Not once. Not since that morning at the table. But I heard things, whispers around town. That he was staying with an old college friend. That he'd gone back to therapy. That he quit his job and was applying to teach night school. I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care. Because I needed him to walk back through the door on his own or not at all. Then one morning, Kara found a small envelope wedged into the mailbox. No return address. Just one line on the front. To the man I almost lost forever. Inside was a single page, handwritten in simple black ink. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to tell you that I see it now, everything. What I became. What I allowed. She didn't make me who I was. I did. But you gave me the blueprint for better. And I threw it out because I thought shortcuts were smarter than values. You built something beautiful. I almost tore it down. If I can help rebuild it quietly, behind the scenes, I will. But even if I can't be part of it, I'll never stop being proud of it. Of you. Love, Daniel. There was no date. No return contact. Just the letter. I showed it to Emily. She read it twice, then looked at me. You believe him? I believe it took him everything to write it. I didn't know if I wanted him back. Not yet. But I wanted to stop hating him. And maybe, I had. We framed the letter and hung it in the hallway. Kara asked about it one day. I just said, "It's from a man who finally remembered where he came from." By the second month, the house was full, not crowded, just complete. People came and went. Some stayed a week, some longer. But every one of them left something behind: a plant, a thank you note, a repaired hinge, a cleaned window. They all said the same thing: "This place doesn't feel like a shelter." I always replied, "It's not. It's a promise." Then, just as things were starting to settle, Greg brought in the mail and handed me a letter with a sharp red seal. It was from Rachel's attorney. "Our client is requesting a final review of ownership on the Hastings property. Failure to respond within 14 days may result in public challenge." Emily froze. "She's still coming." I sighed. "She's coming because she has nothing left. She thinks she can still take what's already given." Louis called an hour later. "We've got all we need to shut this down, but it might make the paper again." "Let it," I said. "You sure?" "Because next time," I told him, "the article won't be about a wedding ruined. It'll be about a house reborn." Cliffhanger. That night, Kara knocked on my door with shaking hands. "There's a woman outside," she whispered. "Said she's here to talk about unfinished business." I stood, and I knew who it was before I even opened the door. She stood where Marjorie once planted roses with a smile that could freeze fire. Rachel looked different. Not worse, not disheveled, just sharper, less polished, more real. Her hair tied back, eyes darker, lips pressed like she was holding back something venomous. I opened the door slowly, stepped onto the porch, didn't invite her in. She didn't wait for permission. "You've made quite the name for yourself, Charles," she said, glancing past me at the house. "Marjorie's house. How poetic." "You here to admire it or try to list it again?" She smirked. "I've had worse ideas." Behind me, Kara stood in the hallway, quietly watching. I gave her a small nod. She closed the door without a sound, giving us privacy. Rachel stepped closer, her heels clicking against the old porch wood like nails on a coffin. "I underestimated you," she said. "Everyone does," I replied. "I could have made Daniel happy, you know. If you hadn't poisoned him." "Daniel made himself miserable. I just stopped covering for him." She tilted her head, studying me. "You think you've won?" "No," I said. "I think I've rebuilt." She looked at the flower beds. June's marigolds were in bloom, bright and loud and unapologetically yellow. "You could have let it go quietly," she muttered. "And you could have walked away with your dignity," I replied. "But you needed one more swing." Rachel pulled something from her bag, a folded paper. "Legal." "Of course. This is a final demand for mediation," she said. "If you ignore it, I'll file suit. You'll spend the rest of your life in courtrooms." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll die, knowing I stood for something." She smiled again, colder this time. "You think people will keep supporting this little charity project once they know what a spiteful old man you are?" I leaned forward, resting my hand on the porch rail, the one Daniel helped me sand down when he was 9. "Do you remember what was written on the back of your own wedding invitation?" She blinked. "What?" I pulled the folded copy from my coat pocket and read it aloud. "Together, we build a legacy." I held it up for her to see. "You just didn't expect that legacy to be yours." Her eyes flickered for just a moment. "Doubt," I continued. "Every time you come after this house, you make it stronger. People see who you are, what you want, and what I've done with what you tried to destroy." She crossed her arms, frustration mounting. "You think this ends with some kind of noble victory?" "No," I said. "I think it ends with you walking off this porch and deciding whether you want to keep losing in court, in town, in every room you walk into, or walk away for good." She stared at me. For the first time, she looked tired. Not weak, just done. "You ruined my life," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You did that. I just turned on the light." A long silence. Then, she placed the paper down on the porch railing and turned to go. As she reached the edge of the walkway, she stopped and looked back. "You'll be alone when you die," she said. I smiled. "Then I'll leave the porch light on for someone who needs it." She didn't reply, just walked away. Back inside, Kara was wiping her eyes. I didn't realize she'd heard. "She scares me," she said. "She should," I replied. "She almost scared me out of my own life." That night, we sat in the living room, all of us. Luis told a joke that made June laugh so hard she snorted. Theo fell asleep with his head on Alicia's lap. And in that quiet, glowing room, I felt something I hadn't felt since Marjorie passed. Home. Greg dropped by with pie peach, Marjorie's favorite, and handed me a letter from a friend at City Council. "You're on the agenda," he said. "People want to nominate Marjorie's house for permanent preservation." I stared at the paper. "I never asked for that." "You didn't have to," he replied. "You made it worth remembering." Emily arrived with a bag of candles and a new welcome mat that read, "Stay a while." As I helped her unpack, she whispered, "Daniel came by last night." I froze. "He didn't want to bother you. He just left something in the mailbox." It was a photo. Daniel, sitting in a school auditorium, chalkboard behind him, surrounded by 3 kids smiling at a desk. On the back he'd written, "I'm teaching now. You're way slow, patient, stubborn." No apology this time. No tears. Just proof of who he was trying to be. Later that night, I lit the porch light and left the door unlocked. Not because I was waiting for Daniel, but because I finally believed he might find his way home. If not to me, then to himself. Some people leave. Some memories fade. But some places, they just hold on. Fall had settled in by the time Daniel returned. The marigolds had started to droop. Kara had found a better job across town and moved into her own apartment. Luis was looking at condos. Alicia had passed her nursing exam. June still insisted on cooking for everyone, even when her knees ached. And little Theo had started calling me Grandpa Charlie, without ever asking if it was okay. The house had shifted, evolved. It didn't need me to be full anymore. But it still held space for me in its creaks, in its kitchen, in the quiet moments after dinner, when laughter drifted down the halls, like music from another room. I was sitting on the porch one evening, wrapped in Marjorie's old knit blanket, when I saw him, Daniel, walking up the path slowly, hands tucked into the pockets of a tan coat, a small envelope in one hand. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Still leave the light on, huh?" "Never turned it off," I said. He climbed the stairs like the boards might collapse, careful, hesitant, guilty. "I don't want to stay," he said. "Not yet. I needed to leave something." He handed me the envelope. His hand shook slightly. I didn't open it. "I saw the article," he added, "about the Preservation Trust, the Community Award. You made it something real." "It was always real," I said. "It just needed a second chance." He looked away, eyes glossy. "I still think about that day," he whispered. "The wedding. How I didn't stop it. How I didn't stop her." "You were afraid," I said. "But fear doesn't make you weak. What you do after that's what matters." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm just hoping, someday, I might be worth it." I looked at the envelope. "Is this another letter?" "No," he said. "It's the deed transfer. For my name. I had it removed. Officially." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't need to do that." "I did," he said, voice firmer now. "Because even if you don't give me a key, I want you to know I'm not holding a claim. Not anymore." He stepped back down the stairs, turned once more. "Thank you," he said, "for the light." And then he walked away. I sat there a long time, envelope in my lap, night falling around me like slow rain. Inside the house, June was making soup. Theo was trying to beat Alicia at checkers. Luis was arguing about football scores with Greg. Life, loud, soft, and steady, was still moving. That night, I added Daniel's envelope to the box in my closet. the one labeled, "Still Learning." Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through each room, touched every doorknob, listened to the silence, heard Marjorie's voice somewhere in the walls or maybe just in my chest. In the hallway, I paused before the framed letter Daniel had written weeks earlier. I pulled a small note card from my pocket and taped it just below his note. It read, "Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a garden, and it needs time, space, and light." The next morning, I found Theo sitting on the porch. "Why do you leave the light on all night?" he asked. "In case someone comes home late." He thought about that. "Even if they don't live here?" "Especially then," I said. That day, we planted new flowers. Marjorie's garden had grown wild again, marigolds, petunias, even a few stubborn roses pushing up through the soil like they refused to give up. Emily joined us for lunch. She brought cookies and a box of old photographs I hadn't seen in decades. One of them was from Daniel's high school graduation. Marjorie, Daniel, and I, arms around each other, smiling so big it looked rehearsed. But it wasn't. She handed it to me. "This one should go in the hallway." I nodded, right under the letters. That evening, as the sky turned orange and the street lamps buzzed alive, I walked out to the porch and turned the light on. Not because I expected Daniel to return, but because even if he didn't, someone would. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. And just as I turned to go back inside, I saw something on the bench, a worn baseball glove, Daniel's Endes, the one he hadn't used since he was 12. No note, no knock, just a memory left where it could be found. Some houses don't just hold people, they hold time. I left the glove on the bench, didn't bring it inside, didn't question why he left it. Maybe Daniel wasn't ready to talk. Maybe that was the talk. A son's way of saying, "I remember." A father's way of hearing, "I'm still your boy." Fall turned to winter, and the porch light stayed on every night. Neighbors started to call it the lighthouse. Not because of the brightness, but because it never went dark, not even during the ice storm when the power flickered across town. Emily laughed and said, "Even the wind knows better than to mess with Marjorie's bulb." People kept coming. Some stayed, some passed through. One night we had a vet who'd just lost his mother and couldn't stop crying over her recipe for meatloaf. June made that exact meatloaf the next night. We never asked how she got the recipe. The walls began to feel different. Softer somehow. Not old, not worn, just lived in. Like they were healing too. We installed shelves for books, painted the laundry room. Alicia built a bench under the front window where people could sit and journal. Theo started collecting rocks from every park he visited and made a path of places on the side yard, a line of stones that curved like a question mark through the grass. I told him he should call it the Hope Walk. He said, "I like yours better." One morning in December, I got a letter in the mail from the city council. Marjorie's house had been unanimously voted into permanent preservation status. It would remain, in official record, a community sanctuary. No one, no buyer, no scheme, no lawsuit could ever claim it again. I stood on the porch that night, wind tugging at my collar, and whispered into the dark, "We did it, Marjorie." The porch light flickered just once. I smiled. Emily brought over a plaque the next week. Greg helped bolt it to the front post just under the mailbox. Marjorie's house est. 1984. Rebuilt 2025. A place to begin again. Daniel hadn't come back. Not in person. But every 2 weeks, another small envelope arrived. No return address. Just simple things inside a photo, a folded drawing from Theo, a check for groceries with "for the house" written in the memo. I never wrote back. Some gaps can't be forced closed. Some bridges have to rebuild themselves, beam by beam. One afternoon, Theo came running into the kitchen, holding a tiny, dust-covered music box. It was under the stairs. I opened it, and a familiar tune spilled out the lullaby Marjorie used to hum when Daniel couldn't sleep. We listened to it 3 times in a row. Theo said, "It sounds like a hug." I said, "That's because it was." The house gave up more secrets. A recipe scribbled in the margin of an old cookbook. A letter from Daniel to the Tooth Fairy. A love note from me to Marjorie I never remembered writing. Emily found it and read it aloud at dinner. I turned red. June toasted to it. We laughed like we'd lived together for years. But not every night was joyful. Some nights, Louise sat on the porch too long. Some nights, Kara cried alone in the pantry. Some nights, the silence inside the house felt like it was waiting for something. So I left the porch light on, every night. Without fail. Not for Daniel anymore. For whoever else the world might forget next. In the spring, a man came by with a briefcase and a tight smile. "I'm here to offer you cash." "Big cash," he said. "We've had inquiries. People want properties like this. The history, the buzz." I didn't even let him finish. "This house isn't for sale," I said. "It's already been bought with memories." He muttered something about emotional folk, got in his car, and drove off. We laughed about it for a week. I don't know how long I'll be here. My knees are slower, my back groans more often. I sometimes forget where I put my glasses, and they're always on top of my head. But I know one thing. When I go, this house will stay. It won't be mine anymore. It'll be Alicia's or Theo's or some kid with nothing but a duffel bag and a story they're not ready to tell yet. And it'll still be Marjorie's, unquote. Because she built it with love. And I rebuilt it with memory. And together, we left the door open for the next person who needs a soft place to land. A week ago, a new letter came. But this one wasn't like the others. It was from Daniel. A return address, a phone number, and a photo of him standing in front of a small home with a wooden sign that read, "The Second Light." A safe space inspired by my father. Below it, he'd written, "You kept the light on." I finally found my way by it. And that was the moment I knew I hadn't lost my son. He'd just been lost for a while. Now, he was lighting porches of his own. The end. Thank you for listening to my story.